Good morning to all. Welcome to biology class. Here I am going to explain you chapter flowers, fruits and seeds. As we know, flowers are perhaps the most beautiful part of a plant. Different plants have different types of flower. Flowers are of many size, color and shapes. Flowers have their reproductive organ, male reproductive organ and female reproductive organ. All the flowers have same basic part. So in this chapter, we are going to study what is the parts of flower. Before this, I am going to explain you what is pedicel and what is petiole. The axis where the flower attached is called pedicel, while the axis where the leaf attached is called petiole. Now what is receptacle? Slightly swollen tip is called receptacle, which is continuous with the pedicel. Now the parts of flower are calyx, commonly called sepal, corolla, commonly called petal, this one, and androecium is also called stamen, which is divided into two parts, anther and filament. Now gynoecium is divided into three parts, stigma, style, ovary, which is encoded ovule in it. Now the description of calyx. This is the outermost roll of a flower consisting green leaf-like part called sepal. The sepal protects the flower when it is in the form of a bud in the initial stage. Sepals may be separate from one another or joined together. Corolla is the second roll of a flower. Some flower, the petals are large in size and produce nectar, colored structure and usually scented. These characteristics help in insect pollination of a flower, and petals also protect the reproductive organ which are at the center of the flower. Now the next part of a flower is androecium. This is the male reproductive part of a flower. The swollen top is called stamen, and that stamen divided into two parts. First one is filament and another one is anther. This anther encoded yellow colored dusty particle called pollen grain. Now the structure of gynoecium, the female reproductive part, it consistingly called carpel or pistil. It is divided into three parts. Stigma, the top swollen tip of a pistil is called stigma. The style, the middle part of a pistil is called style, and ovary, the swollen part at the bottom of pistil is called ovary. The ovary contains tiny egg-like structure called ovule. The ovule contains female sex cell of a plant, while the pollen grain contains male sex cell of a plant. Here the diagram of pistil, which is divided into three parts. First one is stigma, second one is style, and the last one is ovary. Ovary encoded a tiny egg-like structure called ovule. Now I am going to describe you what is pollination. The transfer of pollen grain from the anther of a stamen to the stigma of a pistil is called pollination. Pollination are of two types. First one is self-pollination and second one is cross-pollination. In self-pollination, pollen grain transfer to the stigma of a same flower is called self-pollination, while in cross-pollination, pollen grain transfer to the stigma of another flower is called cross-pollination. Cross-pollination are of three types: pollination by insect, pollination by wind and pollination by water. Some of the flowers produce nectar, scent and are large and colorful structure. By these, the insect get attract on it, sit and the pollen grain attached to the body of insect. When this insect flew and sit on another flower, this pollen grain get fused with the stigma and insect pollination will happen there. The insect pollinated flower have a large bright colored and scented petal as well as nectar to attract insect for pollination. Here the example of insect pollination: sunflower, marigold, bougainvillea, jasmine and banana. Pollination by wind. The blow wind carries pollen grain from one flower to other flower and help in pollination. Wind pollinated flowers do not have brightly colored and scented petal or nectar because they do not have to attract insect. The wind pollinated flowers have anther that hangs outside flowers to catch the wind. They produce large amount of light small pollen grains which can blow the wind. The wind pollinated flowers have also spreading and feathery stigma catch the airborne pollen grain. Some of the wind pollinated flowers are in the plants such as grass, maize, rice, sugarcane, bamboo and palm. Pollination by water. The pollination in aquatic plants, submerged plant, under the water plant shown water pollinated pollination here. They are easily carried by water from flower to flower for pollination. Here the example of water pollination is Welsonaria and hydrilla are showing water pollination. Fertilization. After the pollen grain falls on the stigma of a flower, the next step is fertilization, the process in which the male gamete present in pollen grain fuses with the female gamete present in ovule to form a new cell called zygote. Zygote will be 2 in number of diploid cell structure. Here, the definition of fertilization is the fusion of pollen grain with the female gamete, that is ovule, and the formation of zygote is called fertilization. This zygote is 2 in number, means diploid structure. This zygote develops into embryo and this embryo forms a seed and the seed is developed into a new plant body. Here the structure of fertilization in plant: pollen grain drops on the stigma of a female reproductive system and then it will make a pollen tube. That pollen tube gets fused with the ovule and the formation of zygote, 2 in number of cell. This zygote will develop into embryo and then seed and then new plant body will form. So here my first part explanation is done. Hope you children understand my explanation. We will continue this chapter in second term.